Thank you, Mr. Rubin, for joining us and sitting down with us for a quick interview. I just want to start straight with a very straightforward question. What do you make of the current visit by President Vladimir Putin to India? How do you assess the current visit?
From Russia's perspective, the visit is extremely positive, and India has bestowed honors on Vladimir Putin that he can hardly get anywhere else in the world. I would actually argue that Donald Trump deserves a Nobel Prize for bringing India and Russia together the way he did. That said, while Indians may celebrate many of the memorandums of understanding and agreements, the question for me is, how many of these agreements are actually going to come to fruition once the pomp and circumstance moves on? And second of all, how much of the decisions being made now are motivated by a true melding of interests, and how many are being motivated by animosity towards the way which President Donald Trump has treated Prime Minister Modi and India more broadly? Put another way, is a few months or a few years of Trump worth reorienting India toward Russia for decades to come?
Mr. Rubin, the ties between India and Russia is not just about US, as we have seen. We shared very close ties through decades. I just want to understand from you how this current visit is being looked is viewed in US policy circle. Is it concerning in US the way this trip has panned out, the outcome of this visit?
It's being perceived in two different ways. If you're Donald Trump, it's being perceived through the lens of, I told you so, that this embrace of India towards Russia is affirming what Donald Trump wants his spin to be. Because Donald Trump isn't going to admit that he is the one at fault. Now, if you're the 65% of Americans who dislike Donald Trump, according to the recent polls, then what we are seeing now is the result of Donald Trump's gross incompetence. There's a lamenting that the United States-India partnership, which has built over 25 years, is being shredded by a senile incompetent in the White House. So either way, of course, the Americans interpret events through the lens of the United States. And we don't fully understand, or at least the White House doesn't fully understand, that the cost of Donald Trump's actions. Look, a lot of us are still flabbergasted at how Donald Trump has reversed US-India ties. And many people question what motivates Donald Trump. Perhaps it was the flattery of the Pakistanis. More likely, it was bribery on the part of the Pakistanis or their backers in Turkey and Qatar towards Donald Trump. But, you know, if that's the case, this is one disastrous bribe that is going to saddle America with a strategic deficit for decades to come. It should be the US president celebrating India. And the fact that it's not is evidence of the sheer incompetence which has marked President Donald Trump's second term.
Mr. Rubin, I just wish to draw your attention to the outcome of this visit, of President Putin's visit. India and Russia have agreed on a strategic economic roadmap for 2030. It is coming at a time when West is pushing, particularly US is pushing India away from Russia, deterring, using various means to deter India from doing business with Russia. And the two countries have signed a strategic economic roadmap for economic partnership. How do you see, how do you assess it? What do you make of it?
Well, this is what I mean. While I understand the agreements and the roadmaps which India has signed with Russia,
Yeah.
at the same time, it's only been 2 years since Russia defaulted on India with regard to some major defense contracts. And so the question which Indian leaders need to ask is whether they are embracing Russia because they trust Russia, or whether they are embracing Russia to send a signal to the United States. Frankly, the only path forward for India, in my view, is for India to double down on its own indigenous industries. And of course, it has been, but no agreement with Donald Trump and no agreement with Vladimir Putin is going to substitute for that indigenous capability, because we've seen both Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin break their agreements before.
Mr. Rubin, during the talks between President Putin and Prime Minister Modi, Putin has asserted Russia will continue uninterrupted shipping of fuel. So, how do you see this messaging? Is what is going to be reaction from US after listening to this? Because what they are trying to push is not India not to buy the oil, Russian oil, and now here Putin in India is making this statement. What do you make of it, and how are you what are you expecting from US administration on this?
What Americans don't understand is that Prime Minister Modi was elected by Indians to represent Indian interests. India is the most populous country. It's soon to have the third largest economy in the world. And for that, it needs energy. Now, there's two problems with the US approach. First, the US is being hypocritical because we purchase from Russia. We purchase goods and materials that we don't have alternative markets for. So we are being hypocritical when we lecture India. At the same time, if we do not want India to purchase Russian fuel, there's a simple fix to that. What are we going to do to provide fuel to India for cheaper and in the quantities India needs? If we don't have an answer for that, our best approach is simply to shut up, because India needs to take care of Indian security first. Now, one of my bigger concerns moving forward, however, is with regard to IMEC, the India-Middle East Economic Corridor, which Prime Minister Modi had unveiled at the G20 summit just in September of 2023. The question many are going to start to ask, not only in Washington, but in Europe, in Israel, and in the Middle East, is whether the agreements Prime Minister Modi signs with President Putin now are somehow going to trump all the planning for the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. Put another way, is anger at the United States and pique at President Donald Trump going to end up driving a wedge between India and many of its other alliances in West Asia and Europe?
Mr. Rubin, my next question would be about that experts here in New Delhi believes that believe that a US tariff which was supposed to deter India from from buying Russian oil have failed, and they have pushed New Delhi closer to Moscow, like we are seeing right now. Do you also believe that? And what is the solution of that now for US when it comes to such scenarios?
Yes, I very much believe that. The tariffs that are placed on India are unjust. and illogical. And they hurt the United States more than they hurt India, both economically and, as we see, strategically. I am hard pressed to find a greater example of sheer incompetence than we see when it comes to President Donald Trump's approach to India. Now, what frustrates me is that this is not a consensus approach. Congress recognizes the value of India. However, if Congress isn't willing to speak up and tell Donald Trump that the president is wearing no clothes, then the Congress is just as guilty. What I really lament, however, is that the growth in US-Indian relations has not been the product of one party or one president. And while there's a fear among many in Washington that Donald Trump could retaliate against them if they contradict him, there are some people that are above that fear and above Donald Trump's ability to retaliate. Specifically, President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama need to come to New Delhi and show themselves as the true bipartisan faces of the United States to reinforce the fact that President Donald Trump is an anomaly rather than the true representation of the United States moving forward.
Mr. Rubin, what would be your suggestion from for India and for the US from here on? Like, where should they walk toward? Where should they move to have a good relationship and to have a better understanding?
Well, what we're seeing with Donald Trump is the equivalent of a stress test in a bank to see whether the bank is able to withstand a crisis. Donald Trump is that crisis, and it's a crisis solely of America's own making. There is no strategic logic for the United States embracing Pakistan. It should not be a major non-NATO ally. It should be designated a state sponsor of terrorism, period. And if Asim Munir comes to the United States, he should be arrested as opposed to honored, much like Manuel Noriega was in Panama so many years ago. So the fact of the matter is, what we need is the quiet diplomacy behind the scenes, and perhaps at some point, a more vocal apology on the part of the United States for the way we have treated India over the past year. President Donald Trump doesn't like to apologize, but the interests of the United States, and I would argue that the interests of world democracies, are much more important than one man's ego, no matter how inflated it is. We also need to recognize that while India may be celebrating its relations with Russia once again, that the future of Russia is uncertain. The Russian population is in decline. The Russian economy is in decline. And when Vladimir Putin passes away, it's not clear what is going to happen to Russia. That means that China continues to be the biggest threat to face not only India, but also the United States, and frankly, in the future, Russia as well. And therefore, no matter what the dispute that we now see between the United States and Russia, between the United States and India, it's important that all those countries that are threatened by Russia, that all those countries that are threatened by China are able and willing to recognize that threat and not let China triumph by our own squabbling.